Well, a Minneapolis woman calls it emotional hacking. Scammers drained $800,000 from her dad's bank account.
He's a 76-year-old Ukrainian immigrant who sold his home in Washington state and essentially became homeless a week later. Fox 9's Corin Hoggard tracked down one of the people to whom the victim sent cashier's checks.
A 76-year-old man sold his 2,300-square-foot home in Washington state, and 8 days later he was living in a Motel 6 with $0 in his bank account after scammers drained every penny of his $800,000 life savings in what his daughter calls emotional hacking. And if you think this could never happen to someone you love, you need to hear this story right now. And make sure you subscribe because we're investigating real scams that are destroying lives every single day.
Yeah, I feel bad. Feel very bad.
Ollie Vico is a Ukrainian immigrant who worked his entire life, saved his money, bought a home, and planned to live out his retirement in peace and dignity. But when the movers showed up to help him relocate, he couldn't pay them. And that's when his daughter, Julia Elders, who lives almost 1,700 miles away in Minneapolis, got the call that would shatter everything.
Yeah, you'll see. And then I pressed him and pressed him and pressed him, and then finally he relented and said, I won sweepstakes. And I'm like, oh no.
She pressed him and pressed him to tell her what happened, and finally he relented and said the words that made her heart sink, quote, I won sweepstakes. And she immediately knew, oh no, he'd been scammed. This is a story about how quickly predators can dismantle a lifetime of hard work, how the people we trust to protect our money sometimes fail us, and how the cruelest scams in America today are specifically designed to exploit the emotions, the hopes, and the trust of senior citizens who simply wanted to believe that something good was finally happening to them. Let's go back to April 26th when this nightmare began, because understanding the timeline is absolutely critical to grasping just how ruthless and efficient these scammers were. Ollie Vico had just sold his home, and his bank account held the entire $800,000 balance from that sale, money he planned to live on for the rest of his life. The scammers made contact with him and told him he had won a $17 million sweepstakes, but in order to claim his prize he would need to pay various fees, taxes, and processing costs. And they didn't just call once and disappear. They called and texted him every single day.
Coming up against this feeling of like how deep this is going, and it's really hard to wrap your head around of the types of
building a relationship, creating urgency, and applying psychological pressure that kept him moving in the direction they wanted. Between April the 26th and May 3rd, just 7 days, Ollie Vico sent cashier's checks in amounts up to $50,000 each to addresses all across the country, and by May 3rd, his balance was zero, $800,000 gone. The crooks knew exactly what they were doing. They chipped away at his account in increments that were large enough to drain him quickly but structured in a way that somehow slipped past the fraud detection systems at both Chase Bank and Bank of America, where he held accounts. Julia Elders began investigating immediately, and what she found was a trail that led to phone numbers and addresses scattered across the United States. One number connected to a business called Exquisite Party Management in Florida, a party entertainment service registered to a woman named Genetica Jones, and that name appeared on 2 of the $50,000 cashier's checks that Ollie Vico had sent. When a reporter reached Genetica Jones by phone and told her that an elderly man had sent her more than $50,000 in cashier's checks and asked why, she simply said, "Yeah, I feel bad," and then hung up. And listening to that brief recorded conversation brought Julia to tears because it made the whole thing feel even more real and more vast. She described it as coming up against the feeling of how deep this really is, how many types of people are involved, what other crimes are being committed with this money, and it's really hard to wrap your head around. Now, let's talk about what should have happened here, because Julia Elders believes that Chase and Bank of America should have recognized these highly unusual transactions and intervened before her father lost everything. A 76-year-old man suddenly writing multiple cashier's checks for $50,000 each over the course of just 1 week is not normal behavior, and banks have fraud detection systems specifically designed to catch this kind of activity. When the media reached out to both banks, they said they needed more time to investigate the situation. And a banking expert later explained that banks are in the same position as families. They would like to prevent these scams before they even happen. But the reality is that once an account holder authorizes a transaction, especially with cashier's checks, the money is almost impossible to recover. The FBI opened an investigation, and Julia spoke to an agent just before giving her media interview. But even the FBI told her, quote, "You have to be your own little sleuth," which tells you just how overwhelmed law enforcement is by the sheer volume of these scams and how little hope there is of getting the money back. So, what are the red flags that every family needs to watch for? Because this can happen to your parents, your grandparents, your neighbors, and it happens faster than you think. First, if someone tells you they won a sweepstakes or lottery they didn't enter, it's a scam 100% of the time. Legitimate sweepstakes never require you to pay money up front to claim a prize. Second, if someone is asking for payment via cashier's checks, wire transfers, gift cards, or cryptocurrency, that is a massive red flag because those payment methods are nearly impossible to reverse or trace. Third, if the communication is constant, daily calls and texts that create urgency and pressure, that is a psychological manipulation tactic designed to isolate the victim and keep them from talking to family or friends who might intervene. Fourth, any request to keep the winning secret or not tell family members is a clear sign of a scam because legitimate prize organizations don't care who you tell. And fifth, if an elderly loved one suddenly starts making large, unusual transactions, withdrawing large sums, or writing big checks, that is the moment to step in and ask questions with compassion, not judgment. By the time the movers arrived at Ollie Vico's home, he was broke, he couldn't pay them, and he had nowhere to go. So he ended up living in a Motel 6, a heartbreaking fall from the stability and comfort he had earned over decades of work. His only income now is a $1,600 a month Social Security check, which is nowhere near enough to cover rent, food, and basic living expenses in most parts of the country. Family and friends started a GoFundMe campaign to help him with immediate living expenses and to try to get him into stable housing. And the story gained traction on social media when Seattle Seahawks wide receiver Tyler Lockett saw the campaign, contributed $2,000, and posted about it to raise awareness. The community response has been compassionate and generous, but it doesn't erase the fact that a 76-year-old man who did everything right, who saved his money and owned his home, is now facing homelessness because criminals exploited his trust. There is something deeply disturbing about scams that target the elderly, because these are not crimes of opportunity. They are crimes of predation. They rely on the fact that older adults grew up in a time when a phone call or an official-looking letter meant something, when people's word mattered, and when trusting others was not considered foolish. Scammers exploit that generational difference in perspective. They use technology to spoof official numbers. They create fake websites and documents, and they manipulate emotions with surgical precision. Public reporting doesn't say whether Ollie Vico had any cognitive decline or was simply a trusting person who got caught in a perfect storm of manipulation. But either way, he is the victim here, not the person to blame. The blame belongs entirely to the criminals who orchestrated this theft and to the systems that failed to stop it in real time. So here's what you can do right now. First, have a conversation with the older adults in your life about these scams. Not in a way that makes them feel foolish or incapable, but in a way that empowers them with information and lets them know they can always call you if something feels off. Second, consider setting up account alerts or even joint accounts with trusted family members so that unusual activity can be caught early. Third, if you or someone you know is being targeted, stop all communication with the scammer immediately, do not send any more money, report it to the FBI at ic3.gov, report it to the FTC, and contact your bank right away to see if any transactions can be reversed. Fourth, Share stories like this one because awareness is the best defense. And if this video helps even one person recognize the warning signs and protect a loved one, then it has done its job. So make sure you subscribe and share this with your family because we're going to keep investigating these scams and bringing you the truth. The lesson here is painfully clear. Scammers are ruthless, they are organized, and they are targeting the most vulnerable people in our society with tactics designed to bypass logic and appeal directly to emotion, hope, and trust. Ollie Vico's story is a tragedy, but it's also a warning. Protect your loved ones, ask questions, stay vigilant, and never assume it can't happen to you, because in just 7 days a lifetime of security can vanish, and no one deserves to spend their final years homeless because they believed in the possibility of something good.